Alrighty. Evening, everyone. I hope you guys are all well. I'm just going to check that I'm streaming to Facebook, okay? Bear with me, and then we'll crack on. Hang on, everyone. Hopefully we're good. Alrighty, I think we are live on Facebook. We're live on Facebook. Yes, we're live on Facebook. So just going to give it another minute, and then we'll go live now that we're streaming to Facebook and Zoom. Those of you on Zoom, hello. Those of you on Facebook, hello. I hope you guys are all well. Hope you had a nice day and a nice weekend. Today, moving on to session 3 of the Paleolithic Health Plan, where we're kind of carrying on for the final session of this series on the kind of the nature connection side. So just gonna wait just so we start on time. I don't want to start a little bit early. Right. Okay, so 7 o'clock, we're good to go. Those of you on Facebook, hello. I'm just waiting. So there's a bit of an update. There's a timing update with the comments on Facebook streaming through to Zoom and the phone when I'm live. Okay, so if you're asking questions on Facebook, I'm not ignoring you. It's just it takes a while for them to upload onto the live stream. Okay, if I don't answer them when we're live, I'll answer them retrospectively. Those of you who are on Zoom, hi Helen, good to be back. Hello. So those of you on Zoom, if you've got any questions, as always, just ping them up in the comments box, and I can see those as we're going through. Okay, so today, session 3. See, it's very bizarre. Those of you who watched last week, for some unknown reason, the titles kind of magically appear like that, and I've got absolutely no idea how to do that. But anyway, so today we're carrying on with the nature connection practices in a much more specific way, much more focused way. This is kind of the last episode of the series that's going to focus in really specifically on the nature connection practices, on the nature immersion techniques, all of that side of things, because we want to make sure we're moving on to the rest of the framework. Because when it comes to the Paleolithic genome, when it comes to the mismatch, let me just turn that light on. When it comes to the Paleolithic genome work, when it comes to all of the mismatch hypothesis work, the key is that breadth. Okay, it's no good just doing one small aspect of the collective field really, really well. We want to be doing a small amount from lots of areas, because that's what gives us that multifactorial approach, and that's what seems to have the biggest effect upon activating the Paleolithic genome in a way that's going to really reduce that mismatch. Okay, so after today, the next sessions are going to move on to the optimal human movement patterns, how we can replicate our Paleolithic blueprint for optimal movement. Huge misunderstanding, and I include myself in that. Even going back 18 months, maybe to the start of the first lockdown, my understanding of the evidence, the science around optimal human movement was very much based around clinical evidence, which some of which was very, very right, and some of which was wrong. And the area where it was wrong was that the research that showed how if we replicate, we have this genetic structure that we've evolved for 160,000 years over, that is giving us what optimal movement looks like in terms of variety, in terms of intensity, in terms of duration, in terms of rest. And the optimal human movement exercise profiles are the ones that replicate that most accurately. And this is an exploding area of research. And it's the area that I've personally done the most research on in the last couple of years, or last 18 months, just because it's really opened my eyes into a whole new area of exercise and movement research. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the research around optimal human diets, detoxification kind of mindset that that comes from this Paleolithic framework. So it's going to move on into a slightly different tangent in all the subsequent episodes. But it's really important that we build upon what we spoke on last week. We build upon the gains and the benefits of the sit spot, okay? Because it's so important. And for me personally, I think that the nature connection practices are probably the area of the Paleolithic genome research that is probably one, the most powerful, and two, the least utilized. Because a lot of people will optimize their diet, and a lot of people have got quite good exercise patterns, but our connection with the natural world is being severed at a very rapid rate. And so I think it's worth going to town on this. It's worth just reiterating a few more points. The aim of today is to focus in on some very specific techniques, okay, that are the perfect complement to the time that we spend in our sit spot, whether it's a sit spot in the garden, whether it's a sit spot out in nature, and not just when we're there, but when we get to it. So the sit spot that I often go to is about a 15, 20-minute walk. And you can use that walk to maximize the gains you're getting even further. So these techniques are really good to build into your getting to your sit spot and in your sit spot. And even more so, these are techniques that really bind us to the natural world. Okay, they really, the sit spot is more about this, it's about finding a place. It's about finding a place where we can use these awareness techniques that we spoke about last week. I hope you guys all found the written documents. Did everyone find the written documents that support last week's episode where we spoke about the peripheral vision, the kind of the awareness stimulating questions? If you didn't, then check them out, because they're on the Paleolithic Health Plan page on the Ayurvedic Mentor website. And I really encourage you to look at those documents, because they take the benefits you get from the sit spot and they exponentially increase them. Okay. These techniques are then putting another level of specificity, another level of impact on top of those. Okay. Hi everyone. Hi Maureen. Hi Helen. Okay, Helen, if you haven't, those of you who haven't looked at those documents, I guess the priority from last week is one, find the sit spot. Once you've done that, the second priority is to look at those two documents, because if you've got the peripheral passive awareness and you've got the active foveal awareness, and you're using both of those, that's where you're really tapping into those kind of benefits. Okay, so do check those out. Just out of interest, before we dive in, those of you on the Zoom and on Facebook, if you didn't already have a sit spot, is there anyone here who didn't have a sit spot who's now got one? Whether it's in their garden, whether it's in the woods, on their walking run, has anyone kind of made a conscious decision to actually create or find or begin looking for one, just out of interest? Or it might be that you guys have already got one actually. I can see some comments coming up now. Yeah, okay, good. So people on Facebook. Okay, that's good, because it's really important for me that people do actually create this sit spot. Okay. And again, before we dive into it, I just want to reiterate why these techniques are important. Yeah, they're important because they're fun, they're empowering, they're educational. I think they're things that if you've got even an iota of obsessiveness in your personality, can really kind of take over in a good way, because no walk or nature connection, time spent in nature is ever the same again in a good way. And that's brilliant, but that's not the main motivation, the main rationale why we're using these techniques. We're using these techniques because the evidence shows that we evolved in the natural world. We have this deep-seated genetic need for nature connection. And when we get that, the Paleolithic genome is activated in a way that minimizes that mismatch hypothesis, that minimizes the risk of these mismatched diseases. So yeah, these techniques are enjoyable to learn, but it's which is good, but it's more than that. This is still coming to this issue from the angle of health promotion, longevity support, and disease prevention. Okay, so these are, we could quite easily label these as clinical tools as much as we could nature connection tools. In the same way that we label meditation as a clinical tool, we label exercise as a clinical tool, we label self-massage as a clinical tool, we label good diet, etc., etc. All of these techniques can be labeled as clinical tools. Okay, so it's important that we view it in the light that they've been designed. Maureen started making one, ordered plants. Awesome! That's brilliant. You're actually creating your kind of own vision, which is brilliant. Make sure you post up a photo of that, Maureen, after you've done it, because I'd love to see that. And I think you've got quite a creative brain, haven't you, Maureen? So from what I think, what I remember. So I'm sure that will be pretty good. Why these techniques? So again, this was a really hard one. Actually, this whole course has been one of the hardest to put together. Not because there's not enough content, because it's too much. We've had to continually cut stuff out, or else it will become, a 24-week course or whatever. And we might revisit some of the stuff we've cut out in weekly wisdoms or ad hoc sessions. And that applies to most of the sessions and most of the content we'll be covering. We've had to really cut it back to the really most important approaches. And the reason for that is that the Paleolithic work, the evolutionary medicine work, is what's called a heterogeneous model. And a heterogeneous model is a model which is essentially where you've got more than one way of skinning a cat. You could approach it from this angle or that angle, or a combination of lots of different angles. Because of that variety, because of that heterogeneity, you have to kind of cherry pick the techniques. If there's 50 techniques that have been tried and used, you have to pick the ones that ultimately are easiest to implement, that require the least support to implement, the ones that are most effective, the ones that are enjoyable, the ones that are much more likely to be practiced this time next year, the ones that are sustainable. And some of the Paleolithic work is new to me. Like I said, the exercise, human movement research is relatively new to me. It's not something I've had a lot of personal experience with, other than the last 15 months where I've really taken it on board. And that's very much a research-driven mindset for me. Other approaches, particularly these approaches, are something that I've lived and breathed and learned from, for 20 plus years. And these techniques, I guess, have cherry-picked the ones that personally I've had the most success with in terms of continuing to use them. They're almost habitual now. They just happen naturally, and they will happen to you naturally as well, really easily. And also professionally, we've used and recommended sit spots and leopard walking, and all the things we're going to talk about today, to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients in clinic over the years. And what never ceases to blow my mind is that we've seen these techniques have really quantifiable impacts upon clinical biomarkers. So we've seen these techniques lower something called CA125 markers, which are the main cancer marker of ovarian cancer. We've implemented these techniques, and within about 8 weeks, we've seen these cancer markers come down in blood work. Probably I've got, I don't know, maybe not 100, but not far off of patient immune blood work showing how these techniques significantly optimize immune function, particularly immune cells that have anti-cancer mechanisms, immune cells that are essential for preventing infections. We've seen these approaches lower inflammatory markers. We've seen them to optimize blood glucose. We've seen them optimize melatonin. And that to me is really interesting, because it's something that's time tested and has been used for thousands of years, and yet we haven't even got to draw upon published evidence. We're seeing this have a clinical impact in the people we're seeing face to face in real life. And that for me, is kind of the highest level of evidence, because it's not based upon publication bias or journal bias or this, that, and the other. It's real life. And lots of these approaches, again, like I said last week about some of the training and learning I was very fortunate to do in Southern Africa, Mozambique and South Africa. Lots of these techniques are just mainstream and just integral to the life of these indigenous cultures. and they're learned from a very young age. They're learned from kind of 7, 8 years of age, and they just become, which is why these cultures are so connected to the natural world. They had this almost animalistic, mythical kind of connection with the natural world, not because they're special or because their genetic makeup is different. It's just a learned skill. Okay, so the techniques we've chosen are the ones that I think you're going to get on most with, are you going to enjoy and you're going to experiment with. Okay, the last thing before we get into the techniques is, how do we use them? And the biggest thing is that you need to view them in the context of them being fluid. Okay, they're not, the sit spot is, you know, much more structured. The aim is that you find a sit spot, you create a sit spot, and you try and use it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week. Okay, that's structured, it's much more specific. These techniques are much more fluid. They don't need to be, you know, daily, they don't need to be put into the calendar, they don't need to be scheduled or manualized. It's just a case of using them on an ad hoc basis, using them when and when you can, when you want to. So, you know, you might be out walking the dog, and you might, you know, take a picnic with you or a flask, and you might just sit down against a tree and enjoy a nice cup of coffee looking out over a beautiful view. You might walk to your sit spot in nature, and you might consciously initiate the leopard walking kind of walking pattern, which is a fantastically profound almost way of getting much closer to the animals and birds around you without disturbing them. It's just an ancient technique that I'm kind of mildly obsessed with. I love it. You know, it might be that you're having a cup of tea in your back garden in your sit spot, and you might use the kind of the visual bird tracking you know, technique just to ground you, and it almost becomes a meditation. So it doesn't supersede the sit spot. It's not higher in importance. It's just things that whenever you go out into nature, whenever you go out into garden, whenever you go out for a walk or a run, these are just things that you just want to begin to integrate. And a lot of people will get a bracelet or something that they see regularly on their wrists or a ring that acts as a memory prompt to use these techniques. And actually, the lady I spoke about, who we saw a reduction in CA125 as the cancer markers, she got a woven bracelet, so that the aim being, whenever she went out in nature, walking the dog or just for a general walk, that was her visual prompt to begin to use these techniques. But once you use them for about, what is the evidence? You know, the evidence says about 21 days of doing something, it becomes habitual, like brushing our teeth. We don't think, oh, I need to brush my teeth tonight. It's subconscious, it's automatic. And these very quickly become the same. You know, my kids always laugh if we go out in the woods. We're always out in the woods on the bikes or walking. And even they have got to a point now where they'll kind of, you know, if we say, you know, we can hear a deer or whatever, they'll just kind of begin the process of, not very well, but they understand leopard walking. Why? Just because they've been immersed to it. So very quickly, these become habitual reactions to how you are in the natural world. So what are the techniques? So each one of these is going to have a very short written document overviewing the instructions. Okay, I'm not going to overview them in detail tonight, because there's no need to do that. They're super easy. And it would take, you know, far too long and probably be quite boring for everyone for me to overview each one in detail. What I'm going to do is just introduce them and introduce why we're using them and the benefits of using them and some tips for using them. The aim being that you can then look at the ones that maybe most intuitively appeal to you. You could look at the document that will be published, will go live tomorrow, and you can use that as a kind of a structure and manual for, you know, for practicing these techniques. So they're the ones that we're going to put up. Leopard walking, the benefits of outdoor cooking and eating, something called throwing our hearing, or auditory distancing, bird tracking, the benefit of field guides, and then longer nature immersion experiences. And alongside that, the four at the bottom, we've already covered in the free Nature Connection Week. So I'm pretty sure everyone here took part in that Nature Connection Week with the free week we did back in July, I think it was. And we've got detailed videos on those four. So primal fire meditation, using birdsong as meditation, the benefits of earthing and foraging. So we're also going to upload those videos onto the Paleolithic Health Plan page. Okay, so we've covered them before, but we'll republish them on that platform, so they're all in one place. Okay, so we're just going to whiz through and just talk about these and why we're using them. But before I do that, I'm just going to check the Facebook page to make sure there's no questions there. Is everyone good on the Facebook page? Everyone happy on the Facebook page? Hi, Helen. Hi, Catherine. Hi, Anna, Sheila, Julie, Catherine. Hello, everyone. So leopard walking. Okay, leopard walking is something that's so much kind of science behind it. There's so much kind of mysticism behind it. You know, David Attenborough's, he's done work on the Khoisan Bushmen around the tracking and these kinds of things. So leopard walking is a way of moving in the natural world that creates about 85 to 90% less disturbance. And it's based on something called concentric rings. And there's lots of zoological research around it. So anything that's moving in the natural world throws out these concentric rings of vibrations. So if you're walking through the woods, obviously you can't see these rings, but a deer that might only be 25 meters away from you but unseen, it feels those vibrations, and that's its cue to run away. Or a fox or a badger or a rabbit or a kingfisher or a pheasant or whatever it is. So we create these concentric rings. If we go sprinting through a forest, the concentric rings get bigger and we disturb more. If we go very slowly and quietly, almost stalking through a natural environment, the concentric rings almost disappear. And the reason that's so important, this is one of the things that initially really got me hooked on this area, almost this marriage of anthropology and medicine, is that in these indigenous cultures, particularly Shangaan in Mozambique and Southeast Africa, they got some of the most revered and famous shamans, healers, animal trackers in all of Africa. And leopard walking is the way that gave them that ability to become so exceptional at getting close to animals, because the animals couldn't see them, they couldn't hear them, they didn't know they were there. And the reason it's called a leopard walk is that the walk, if you look at, that's their name, not mine. If you look at the way a leopard stalks when it's getting close enough to prey, it makes virtually no sound. If you slow motion how it places its feet, it rotates it in a way that is so conscious it makes no sound. And for me, it's not just about getting closer to nature. It's not just about getting closer to deers or animals or birds. It forces us to slow down. You can't leopard walk quickly. Okay, you have to leopard walk slowly. And it forces us, often we use the mind to slow down the body, okay, which is really common. Meditation, affirmations, yogas, mantras, we're using the mind to slow down the mind and the body. This is the reverse. We're slowing down the body to slow down the mind. And it works profoundly well because it's different to what we're used to. It makes walking an act of meditation because you have to do it very mindfully. When you're leopard walking, there's no room for anything else. You're not thinking about dinner or shopping lists or to-do lists or work or anything else. It completely immerses you. I've often said it's kind of the easiest form of meditation. Okay. And generally speaking, there's 3 different paces. There's 1 step every second. There's 1 step every 5 seconds, or there's one step every 10 seconds. So if you imagine taking 1 step every 10 seconds, imagine what an act, and that's quite extreme. I can't say I use that one very often. 1 step every 5 seconds is kind of my preferred way. But think about how consciously focused and how meditatively you have to place your feet, where you're putting it, the way you roll your foot. It grounds you so powerfully in the natural world around you. You're aware of everything, every twig that might snap and make a loud sound, every bit of soft grass compared to leaves, which are going to make more noise. You become so absorbed in the act of walking this way that there's nothing else. And the reason that's important is that anything that induces that singular focus is clinically proven to deactivate the amygdala, which in the brain, which in turn is the fast track to deactivating the stress response in the body, which is probably why we've seen it result in blood work that is indicative of a move towards healing. Okay. So it's a brilliant technique. It's a brilliant, obviously you're not going to, you're not going to walk, you're not going to devote a whole walk to leopard walking because it's going to take, you're not going to get very far. The aim is that the way I probably use it the most is where I get to maybe within 150 meters of my sit spot. And then I use the leopard walk to walk that last 150 minutes to get there. Because that means when I get there, the wildlife, the birds, the animals are far less disturbed than what it would be if I walked in normally. So if you sit down for half an hour in that sit spot, the animals are going to go back to normal behavior much more quickly than if you just walk in. You don't need to do that. Just walking in is 100% fine. But if you enjoy that kind of very focused behavior, if seeing more wildlife is important, then this is a brilliant, brilliant technique. Okay. And again, the wildlife thing isn't just enjoyable. It's not just about seeing more animals. In terms of Paleolithic genome activation, connection with wildlife goes right back to the very foundation of the way we lived, the way our genome was mapped. Going back millions of years, even before Homo sapiens. So it fires up all kinds of hardwired systems in the body and in the brain. Okay, so I'm a huge fan of this one. It's super simple to learn. The written instructions are super simple. So I'd love for you guys to experiment with it. Just have a go. Just have a go. It's if you find it hard to meditate, if you're stressed, I defy anyone to do 10-15 minutes of leopard walking and still be stuck in their mind, still be stressed or ruminating or anxious. There's no room in your brain for it. And it's an incredibly fast way of switching the body into a healing response. Okay, incredibly fast. Everyone good with that? Everyone happy with kind of where I'm coming from the leopard walking side? Any questions about that before we move on to the next one? If you do, just ping them up. So huge fan of that one. They're two of my eldest 2 of 3 children. So outdoor, these guys, they're obsessed with, we always outdoors cooking, but I'm sure, we don't need to go into the science of this too much. It's commonsensical. Eating outdoors brings a completely different experience to cooking and eating, whether it's having dinner in your garden occasionally, even in winter, kind of a frosty evening, starlit evening, you're lighting the fire pit, having dinner outside, whether it's spring, summer, autumn, winter, whether you're cooking it or whether you're eating it or both, you're in your garden, at your sit spot, anywhere. Like one of the things we find works really well in terms of getting the kids into this, it's a real priority for us as parents, is making sure that the kids have this kind of contemplative, conscious connection with with the natural world and with themselves and this whole self-care movement. And they're all young, they're all 10 or under, so 10, 7 and 4. So they struggle with the more formal meditation practices, but they're really, really good at saying, okay, we're going to sit down in the woods now and we're just going to sit here and not talk for 15 minutes, and then we're going to cook dinner or cook lunch or have a cup of tea. And that you don't hear a peep from them. They're completely immersed in that. And if you've got kids or grandkids, it's a brilliant way of getting this kind of mindset into their world. And I think it's something that, everyone's situation is different, but we try and schedule at least one al fresco cooking or eating, experience a week, for want of a better word. A lot more in summer, a lot more in the summer holidays, and a lot less, obviously, in winter. But even in a very, not if it's raining obviously, but even in a cold night or whatever, if stars are out, frost or whatever, it can still be an amazing experience. In autumn, the beautiful leaves, in spring with the new growth. It's just a really great way of activating that Paleolithic genome. How did we evolve? Up until 10,000 years ago, we lived and cooked and ate exclusively outdoors. We know that. We know what it feels like. We recognize it. It resonates with us. And anything that resonates with us from that period of time is going to have to activate that Paleolithic genome. So I think, you know, it's a great, again, it's fun. You know, who doesn't like sitting outside in the woods with a cup of tea? You know, it hasn't got to be cooked all the time. It just could be a cup of tea, or, you know, a flask, or, you know, some soup in a thermos. It doesn't need to be difficult. It doesn't need to be, you know, complicated. But yeah, who doesn't enjoy that? Most people, you know, will enjoy sitting down quietly somewhere and having a bowl of soup or a cup of coffee or whatever. So it's something to just to kind of really, again, consciously think about, and trying to think, well, ask yourself the question, when was the last time you ate outdoors? When was the last time you cooked outdoors? And how do you maybe make that more often? Okay, because it can really have quite a big impact. Okay, and aside from that, obviously it's the same. You know, we still get that forest. If it's in the woods, we still get the benefits of nature connection in terms of forest bathing, the air we're breathing. So it's just this accumulative effect. This is another great technique, which is brilliant to use in the sit spot, which is called you know, auditory acoustic distancing, or throwing our hearing. So the human hearing, you know, we're so visually dominant. Humans are so visually dominant. You know, vision, over 50% of our processing requirements are based around vision. And our auditory system is very weak. We don't place, you know, if we're trying to see something in the distance, we don't focus on our hearing, we focus on what we can see. Okay, but the human auditory system is incredibly powerful. Okay, to put it into perspective, that third bullet point, we know that we over a kilometer away, in 360 degrees, we can pick up very, very low levels of sounds, even things like a rustling squirrel in leaves, things like that. And it's 360 degrees. We're about to turn our head because we haven't got rotating ears like a fox. But we only use between 20 and 25% of that capacity on a daily basis. 25%, I mean, that is such a ridiculously low level. You know, that's unbelievable. Bearing in mind that the prediction is we only use 15% of our entire brain. The fact that we're only using a little bit more of our auditory system is pretty significant. And again, if we go back to the Paleolithic world, if we go back to the indigenous cultures, loads of research in the San in Southern Africa, the Shangaan, the Xhosa tribes, yeah, they're kind of much more consciously attuned to their auditory system. They're using about 70 to 75% of their hearing. And if you're in your sit spot, so again, which is why I want to check out the document from last week, the active awareness document, because to maximize the benefits of the sit spot, you want to be engaging as many senses as you can, okay? Because that's where we get that activation. That's where we get all of the biochemical benefits: immunity, lower inflammation, better digestion, lower blood sugar levels, more anti-cancer markers, anti-cancer inhibitor markers, etc., etc. And the simplest way, and there's about 7 or 8 different techniques for cultivating more auditory dominance, but the most effective one, I think, from evidence and from practicing them, is this throwing our hearing, which is when you're in your sit spot, whether it's in nature, in your garden, try and focus on the very near, the middle, and the distant distance. Okay, so kind of 5 meters around you, 20 meters around you, and more than 20 meters around you. And can you focus your hearing on those 3 layers? What you can hear very close to you. You're not worrying about what's in the distance. You're not worrying about a bird singing, 500 meters away. You're choosing to ignore that. You're going to pick it up, but you don't consciously attend to it. You're in the same way that you're focusing, you can focus your vision in the near distance or the distance. It's the same you're hearing. So you're consciously throwing your hearing on a field around you that's about 5 meters in diameter, and you focus your hearing. What can you hear? And what's amazing is very often you can hear things you never knew were there. You can hear small insects burrowing under the leaves. You can hear the wind blowing leaves on the floor. You might hear rustling in a bird above your head that you didn't know was there. After a couple of minutes, you then move up from about 5-10 meters to maybe 20 meters, 20-30 meters, and you pick up a huge amount of information in that area. If you turn your head one way and the other, you pick up more information. And suddenly, if you're quiet, which is why leopard walking is so good, because if you get to your sit spot with less disturbance, there's more activity around you, which means you can practice this more. It's amazing what you hear in that middle distance if you focus exclusively on it, in terms of bird song, in terms of animals, in terms of wind direction, in terms of wind activity, in terms of falling leaves, falling twigs, 101 things. And once you've done that, you try and throw your hearing as far away as you can, into as far as you can see and beyond. And the thing that you'll often pick up then is bird communication. You'll hear a bird song and you'll hear an answer, and you might hear people walking in a path a couple hundred meters away from you. You might hear a train in the distance. You might hear motorway traffic. You might hear an aeroplane. Very often they're man-made sounds, but you can still pick them up. And soon, controlling your hearing to focus on different areas becomes almost your modus operandi. And that turns your sit spot experience in a very, very profound way. It changes it very, very significantly, because suddenly you're aware of these different layers of sound. And it's a brilliant technique for grounding us and connecting us with the natural world around us, in a much more kind of proactive, conscious way. Okay, really, really, really good for that. So that's throwing our hearing. Remember, we don't need to do all of these. We're not going to be leopard walking into a sit spot, throwing our hearing, cooking dinner. We're not doing all of this all the time. It's not practical. All we're aiming to do is have this toolbox of tools that we might just pick one on. We might just we're going for a walk or heading down to the beach or whatever. And we might just try and leopard walk, or we might just try and throw our hearing, whatever it is. So it's not, obviously we're covering it so it sounds like we're manualizing it. We're not manualizing it, but we just want to use these techniques, so if we're out in nature, to make sure we're getting every single benefit we can, because the priority for me is that the nature connection box is being ticked. Okay, because if we're ticking that box, then that aspect of mismatch disease, that aspect of the mismatch hypothesis, that aspect of the paleolithic genome is being addressed. And if that's being addressed, it takes away a huge amount of risk in terms of these mismatch diseases. Okay. So the throwing the hearing is a really, really good one. Fourth one is a brilliant one if you're creating a garden sit spot. Okay. And it's, again, you look at a lot of the shamanism work, you look at a lot of the Southern African and also Indian approaches for this. Visual bird tracking is a brilliant visual mantra. And if you sit in your garden or deck or in the woods, before you kind of connect with it, it often feels like birds just fly haphazard all around us. Okay. But they don't. Most birds, particularly songbirds, have territories, and they will fly around their territory in a structured, repetitive pattern, and they will sing similar songs. They'll perform similar activities at the same spots as they go around patrolling. If you've got a garden, you almost guaranteed to have a robin or a blue tit or a blackbird that's got a territory that crosses or is in your garden. And tracking that is probably the one that I use almost daily, probably. Whenever I have my cup of tea in the morning when I get up earlier than everyone else, they're sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, watching the birds do their same thing, where they're flying to, what they're doing, the songs they're singing, tracking them with our eyes. So that is clinical evidence. There's very, very strong clinical trial data to show that visually tracking birds, connecting to bird song, is probably one of the fastest ways out of an active stress response in the body. Okay, in terms of, it's now proven to lower cortisol, it's proven to increase our feel-good hormones, it's proven to support immunity. All of those things activate our anti-cancer pathways. So it's kind of a very, very simple way of sitting in the garden, making sitting in the garden a much more profound kind of health promotion techniques. Okay, and it also grounds us really powerfully with the world around us. Suddenly, the robin in the garden or the blackbird in the garden isn't just a random event. because that blackbird or that robin is the one that was there yesterday, and it'll be the one that's there tomorrow. They're not different birds, they're the same birds. Then you're in their territory. As far as they're concerned, you're in their territory. And you can strike up really strong relationships with these birds. It sounds funny, but they have their own nuances, their own subtleties, their own idiosyncratic behavior. And it's a beautiful thing to identify that and see there's that robin who always digs in the dirt over there, or there's that blackbird who I can get closer to than the other blackbirds. You build up this rapport, and that's again, that's that very, very powerful connection with the natural world that I personally think is the most powerful way of really activating the Paleolithic genome. I'm convinced all the other stuff we're going to be covering is really, really integral. But I think in terms of very quick firing of the Paleolithic genome, I think this is perhaps the most important. Okay, so I'm a huge fan of these techniques. Any questions about any of those before I move on to the next one? Is everyone good? Everyone good? So this is just a quick one, field guide. So the field guides of South Africa have a brilliant approach for training their guides to learn an almost encyclopedic level of knowledge around animals, plants, trees, birds, etc. And it's literally learn one new species a week. So buy a field guide for British wildlife or whatever country you're in, British trees and British plants or British birds. Just pick 2 or 3 field guides. And every week, just learn one new one. Okay, every week learn one new one. Ideally, that's geographically relevant for you. There's no good learning all about a red deer because or a stag, kind of, because you're not going to see those in here if you live in the south of England, because they only live in Scotland. Or if you live in London, there's no point learning about a golden eagle because they only exist in the Highlands. So trying to make sure you're learning about animals or trees or birds or plants that are close to you. But if you do that, this time next year, you will have learned in detail 52 new animals or trees or plants. And that very, very quickly changes our experience of nature. Because suddenly you go for a walk through woods, through a hedgerow, through a meadow, anywhere. And suddenly the plants growing in the hedgerow, the trees you're walking through, they're not just trees and plants. You actually know them. You know that's an elm tree, or that it is a chanterelle mushroom, or that's an ash tree, or whatever it is. And it's again, it sounds like it's unclinical. It sounds like this is more of a course about botany than it is about medicine, but it's not. Because if you look at the commonalities, probably the single biggest commonality across the evolutionary medicine research is the indigenous cultures who don't have mismatched diseases. In Northern Australia, in Southern Africa, in the central mountain ranges of India, in South America, in North America, these traditional cultures who follow a traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle, they don't have mismatched diseases. If you missed the first episode of this series, check that out. But mismatched diseases are the things that are most likely to kill us. They don't have them. Okay. And what is the most consistent common denominator across all of these indigenous cultures around the world is they are all deeply, deeply connected to and knowledgeable of the natural world around them. Okay. Asking, asking a man or a woman of adult age in any of these communities to go through a walk in their environment, and they will know virtually every tree, every plant, every medicinal herb, every animal footprint, everything. They know everything. And we don't need that same level because we're not dependent upon it. But all I know is that I used this approach when I came back from Africa. And in a couple of years, suddenly you pretty much learn every tree, every plant, every animal that's in your area. And that it changes everything, because you just suddenly you're not an observer of the woods, you're in direct kind of communion with it. And that's a very, very powerful way, again, of acting this Paleolithic kind of model. Okay, this genomic work. Okay, so it's really, really key. The Collins one, if you go on Amazon or go to Waterstones, there's loads and loads of guidebooks, field guides for Britain. The Collins ones are my favorite just because they're very clear The pictures are very good and the descriptions are very good, but they're all pretty much the same, but they're very good ones. Jacqueline, I can definitely vouch for feeling like I'm in our bird's territory in the garden. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting reframing it, isn't it? That's one of the things I often think. Rather than walking through the woods and seeing a deer footprint, it's not so much a case of it's crossed our path. It's more a case of we've crossed its path. We've entered its area, or we're in the garden, and we're digging over the vegetable patch, and the robins come down to get the worms. It's not a case of them moving into our territory. We're invading its territory. I just think it's a very nice way of reperceiving our interaction with the natural world. So I'm just a huge fan of this. So that's really, really good. So you don't even need to get 3 field guides. You might just pick animals or birds or trees and just do that. But even if you did it one every 2 weeks, you're going to be learning a shed load of new information. And that's good for our brain. It's good for our cognitive aging. It's empowering, it's educational. It's just all benefit, nothing to lose. Okay. And then lastly, which is something that I kind of, Holly always laughs, when I was working at the hospital in Southampton. It's about an hour drive from here, and very different to life these days, and as much as very, very stressful, long hours, not home really much at all, and definitely not very good for me, not healthy. I wouldn't say it was kind of particularly healthy lifestyle, but I needed these longer nature immersion experiences, maybe just 1 or 2 a month, and that was it. And I kind of, it was a way of completely and utterly disconnecting from everything and everyone around me, and just recentering. It was like a digital detox. No phone, no music, no internet, just no other people. Actually, it was just getting out for a half a day, 3 hours, 4 hours, 7 hours, just a longer nature connection. It could be walking, it could be riding the bike, it could be walking the dog, it could be spending 4 hours at your sit spot. It doesn't really matter, but aiming for kind of 1 a month. That's what so loads of research in America around this, loads of research of people with HIV, AIDS, loads of research in people with terminal cancer, with PTSD, with depression, with coronary artery disease, loads of clinical cohorts, and they go out for 1 day or 2 days of nature connection. And the evidence is that they gain kind of 6 weeks of treatment gains in 8 or more hours in terms of biomarkers, MRI work, blood work, etc., etc. And the evidence for this is probably the strongest of all of the things we've covered. It's unequivocal now. The effects of half hour in the sit spot is profound. That's enough in and of itself. But if we're doing half hour in our sit spot 4, 5, 6 times a week, and we get a longer 4, 5, 6, 7 hours nature connection once a month, suddenly the gains just skyrocket in a very, very powerful way. And it's something I'd love to kind of do a bit of a social experiment almost on the mentor community, and see, trying everyone who does that, everyone who kind of commits or already does or is willing to, if you can get out in nature, if anyone who gets out in nature for more than 4 hours in this capacity, not as part of a big group where it's talking and laughing, but more in a more contemplative way, with maybe one other person or a dog, or one, to let us know that you did it, but 2, almost to provide an overview of how it made you feel, because we've heard some deeply, deeply moving stories of the effect this has on outlook in life, clarity, decision making. We've had a lot of this for people having the vaccine, making decisions around don't I have the vaccine, and not being able to make a decision because of their being pushed and pulled in different directions by different people and different forces, and almost being lost in the decision making process, and then going out for these nature connection days and clarity. It's a creative act. And that's the other thing, brilliant research done in Switzerland, looking at the effect of these longer nature connection practices on creativity. So, business creativity, sporting creativity, artistic creativity, anything, domestic gardens, decorating. it kind of unblocks things. And it doesn't really matter what it is. We don't need to manualize this. One of the brilliant things, which is kind of harder and easier at the same time, is where you spend 4 or more hours in your nature-based sit spot. So one of the things you may have heard is something called a vision quest, which is where you create a 10 or 20 meter diameter around your spot, and then you've got your food and water and whatnot, but you can't leave that 10 or 20 meter circle for the duration of your time. So if you say, I'm going to do a 5-hour nature connection practice, you go to your sit spot or somewhere in the woods or somewhere you love, a bench, whatever, and you don't leave that place for 4 or 5 hours. And initially your mind goes crazy. The first hour and a half, you sat there, your mind's all over the place and you're thinking, you're bored. Why am I doing this? I'm never going to last 5 hours. But then gradually the mind quietens down. And what you're left with is just this huge volume of space, this huge volume of quiet. And it's the complete antidote to the Western world at the moment, which is doing, busy, rushy, multitasking, noisy, stimulated. And by retracting back, it just is profound. And that was what I used to do most of the time when I was working at Southampton still, was just go to my sit spot and spend 4 or 5 hours there. No phone, no book, nothing, just food and water and just sitting there. And it just, it was like going away for a week's holiday. I used to come back so refreshed. Okay. So I'd love you guys, perhaps more than anything else, to kind of prioritize that. Obviously you can combine all of these. You can leopard walk to your sit spot. You could spend 4 hours there. You can take lunch there and eat it outdoors. You can throw your hearing when you're there. You can apply the knowledge of the trees and animals you've learned. You can join all this up, obviously, but trying to get a longer nature connection experience once or twice a month, I think it gives us, it's kind of the cherry on the cake when it comes to this Paleolithic model. And I'm convinced that the reason that the clinical evidence shows such profound gains is because of this Paleolithic activation. It's activating that part of our genetic structure that recognizes nature, needs nature, understands nature, feels safe in nature, that we're not getting. And if we do get it, things begin to change very, very powerfully. Okay, so I'd love you guys to experience that. Tracy, yeah, absolutely. Can these longer immersions be done hacking on horseback? Absolutely. So if your sit spot is your saddle, then that's an absolute winner, because there you've got multiple, you've got flow states, you've got animal connection, you've got nature connection, you can cover big distances. 100%, Tracy. That's manna from heaven. So yeah, for sure. Definitely. Good question, actually. So just quickly before we wrap up, like I said, there's going to be the 6 short supporting documents that are just going to provide a little bit of structure for all of those. Well, not all of them, not the nature connection, not the longer day one, because that's commonsensical, but how to do leopard walking, how to throw our hearing, etc. So if any of those things we've spoken about really resonates with you, then do check out those supporting documents. I'd also really encourage you to look at those documents from last week, because they take your sit spot experience from good to profound, particularly the awareness one, where you're looking at scanning the ground to the sky and engaging your senses at different levels of height. And those practices are kind of the bedrock of the nature connection research. So I guess the aim is to prioritize that sit spot, trying to spend at least 10, 15, 20 minutes a day in your garden sit spot, in your outdoor sit spot, and then just begin to experiment with these. Just begin to experiment with them, and maybe have dinner outside this week, or try leopard walking, or buy a field guide, whatever it is, but just begin to build up this framework, because I think we can't activate the Paleolithic genome in a way that's going to make inroads into these mismatched diseases without this box being ticked. If this box is left unchecked, we're leaving a massive weakness in our defense. Okay, and we need this. It's so important. The evidence is so clear. So hopefully you can begin to explore that. Hopefully you can begin to experiment with that. if you obviously have any questions about any of this, then use the Facebook page, use the email, and say, well, I've tried leopard walking and it hurts my feet, or I'm trying to throw my hearing, but I can't differentiate between the level, anything, whatever it is, anything that stops you doing this, or any questions you've got about doing it, then please make sure you do run them by us so that we can find alternatives. But I just, and I'm repeating myself, I'll stop waffling now, but I just feel, and I said this in the first episode, that the reason there's the explosion of mismatched diseases, cancers, heart disease, Alzheimer's, et cetera, et cetera. Please watch episode 1 if you haven't, because it's really important. I'm convinced that the lion's share of that risk is because of this mismatch process. And I think the lion's share of the mismatch process is our disconnection from the natural world. And these approaches, yes, they could be taught in a bushcraft course, they could be taught in a field guide ranger course, but they're as relevant, if not more relevant, in the context of health and medicine. Okay, so these are clinical interventions, and I think they're profound. So I've really just kind of plead with you, I suppose, to begin to just slowly build up this framework, because it's profound. Okay, so thank you for joining me this evening. I'm just going to make sure there's no questions on the Facebook page. I often see more wildlife while riding and spot the herbs to forage. I've seen work around that, when you're on horseback, the animals see the horse and not the rider, and they carry on as if there's no rider there, which I think there's potentially some kind of research to be done there anyway. So thank you for joining me. Any questions, let me know. Those documents will be live tomorrow. Check out the documents from last week because they're really important. Any questions, let us know. Have a lovely evening, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday for the weekly wisdom. Okay. Take care, everyone. All the best.